I'm sure that most all of you have probably read the book of Romans, some of you many times, some once in a while. Did you understand it?
Some of it.
Why is it called Romans?
Because it was a letter written by the Apostle Paul to the church at Rome. And so the question is, why are we reading somebody else's mail? But the issue is, the Lord said that these letters were written with the intent that they should be shared around so other people could benefit from them. So here it is, 1900 and some years after the fact, we still get a copy of the English translation of the Greek translation of the Hebrew. So there's enough left of it that we can learn something. Now here's the deal. Somebody once said, one of the reasons people don't understand the book of Romans is because they don't believe what it says. So my intent is that we would look at what it says and we would ask God to help us believe what it says. We will drop all preconceived ideas and old ancient traditions and everything else and just see, what does it say? Are you willing to go there with me on that?
Yes.
Okay, that's what we're going to do. I'm going to ask a question. The enemy uses weapons against the Lord's people. So what do you think are probably two of the most dangerous weapons the enemy uses against the Lord's people? Two of them.
Pride.
Well, pride is certainly a very dangerous weapon. Anything
Lies.
else?
Fear.
Fear. You know, people, if they're afraid, lose all reason. People will run into burning buildings for fear. They'll jump off cliff for fear. They'll do things you would never do if you're using your logic. Fear is a very powerful thing. Another dangerous weapon the enemy uses. What?
Lies.
You already said pride. So.
Lies.
Lies, okay. Or how about another way of saying that? Unbelief. Any of you into flying airplanes? Your own? Anybody? Okay, Ray, you know. And let's just imagine, oh, Sarah too? Okay. You're flying somewhere and you're 180 and you've got a couple of friends along with you and you're going someplace and you're cruising along, everybody's happy. But as you look down, you notice it's getting cloudy down there and you're getting where you can't really see your checkpoints anymore. And then you also notice that for some reason the radio quit working on you. And your magnetic compass says you're flying at 90 degrees, but your gyro compass says you're flying 75 degrees. And you also notice that the fuel gauges, both of them are reading kind of low. And, well, you don't know where you are, and you don't know how you got there. One of your friends says, I think we ought to fly off that way. And the other says, no, we ought to fly off that way. What happens then?
You get lost in a blind canyon and you go, that happens in Alaska a lot.
Yeah, and before that, you get scared.
Terror.
Don't you?
Terror.
You get scared.
Sheer terror.
So fear is the first thing that comes in. He said, I thought I could believe the magnetic compass and I thought I could believe the gyro. I don't know what I can believe, and where unbelief comes in too. And if that's your situation, that's not a happy place to be, is it? But
It
you know,
seems like, especially when other people are saying you should be going another direction.
yeah, giving you all kinds of advice, they don't know what they're talking about either. So, you know, it happens to a lot of the Lord's people at all times. We get in a situation, we don't know where we are, and we don't know how we got here. So one of the reasons for studying the book of Romans is not so that you'll know more about the Bible. It's so that you'll be able to have some way of standing up against these two terrible things, fear and unbelief. Romans will give you a strong shield if we'll look at it and believe what it says. Okay? So, with that, we're going to look at chapter 1, and we're going to look at chapter 1 for about 1 minute. And we're going to look at chapter 2 for about 1 minute, and chapter 3 for about maybe 30 seconds, and chapter 4 for about half a minute. So, I can tell you this. You don't need to look it up because it's not that long. Chapter 1 starts with an introduction. The Apostle Paul writing to the church at Rome, and we got that part. He also says everything going on around us is terrible. There's just idolatry, there's immorality on a grand scale. People are lying to each other. People are afraid, people are confused, people are messed up. The church is in bad shape. And if you think it was bad back then in ancient Rome, what do you think it is today? The world's that way on steroids, wouldn't you say? Okay, chapter 2 says, speaking to the leaders and elders of the church at Rome, well, you guys are saying everything's so bad, but a lot of you are doing the same things you tell other people not to do. So you're a bunch of hypocrites. That was chapter 2. Chapter 3 says, and speaking from the apostle, says, I'm Jewish, and so is it any better to be Jewish than be anybody else? And he says, no, it really isn't, because all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. So there's no particular advantage in being a Jew. That doesn't make you any better than the next guy. That is chapter 3. Chapter 4 says if we're going to be saved, we're saved through faith by the grace of God. So now you got the first 4 chapters down. If we live long enough, we may go back through and look at it in a little more detail. But today, think about this. Romans is like a big giant warehouse that's got everything in it that you need to live on. And so we just went through the introduction. We walked through the front door, met the officials in charge, looked at some of their advertisement. Now we're going to drive our truck around to the back door, to big door number 5, and we're going to start loading in the freight. So if you turn over to chapter 5, that's where we're going to start. All right? Somebody read the first verse first.
Therefore, since we have been justified through faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ.
Okay. So he's assuming that we've got it. We're justified through faith by the Lord Jesus. In the Hebrew, it would have said we're justified by faith through Yeshua. That's translated into Greek, Jesus, into English, salvation. Nice, huh? Now, you remember, how many times have you ever heard me say that everything in the Tanakh is a parable?
That's new.
And what's the Tanakh? What does Tanakh mean? If this was a college course, you'd get a point grade for this. Tanakh is a Hebrew acronym that stands for the Torah, the prophets, and the writings. Ta-Nach. Ta is the Torah, Nach is the prophets, He is the writings. Sometimes yes, so that's what we call it, but the Jews never use that term. They call it the Tanakh. Jesus often quoted from it. He referred to it as the law and the prophets. Many of the apostles quoted. None of the apostles quote each other. They always quote out of the Tanakh. Many, 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 many times. But some people think, well, the Tanakh is obsolete. That's the Old Testament. We don't do nothing. Well, then the apostle must have made a great mistake by quoting so much out, and the Lord himself did. Does it suppose the Lord making an error?
No.
What did he bother quoting out of the Old Testament? Isn't that obsolete?
No, that's the
Well, he seemed to think it wasn't obsolete, that we ought to know something about it. So, the book of Romans quotes a lot out of the Tanakh. If you want to learn what the definition of a parable really is, you're going to have to look into the Tanakh. You willing to do that? Whatever your tradition may have said, forget that. We're going to look into the Tanakh quite a bit. So, I brought a few notes along. The only reason I did is so that you think I know what I'm doing. You know, I've learned a long time ago, it's not so much what you know, it's what you can make other people think you know. They'll pay you if they think you know. Somebody like to look up 1 Corinthians chapter 2 and verse 14.
The man without the Spirit does not accept the things that come from the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness to him, and he cannot understand them, because they are spiritually discerned.
Okay, what he's simply saying is this. The natural man, in other words, people the way we're born into this world, if you're relying on your natural talent, your IQ, your ability to understand, your ability to read, if you're relying on that to learn the things of God, well, I got sad news for you. You're not going to get much out of the study because it's only those who are taught by the Spirit of God. So we need to pray that the Lord will give us of His Spirit to understand what He's saying. Otherwise, we're wasting our time. What do you think? If you're coming here and you are not listening to the Spirit of God to teach you this, you will not get anything out of it worth taking home. So if that's where you are, then my suggestion would be ask God to give you the ability to listen to His Spirit and the willingness to believe what He says. If you don't, well, I don't know what to tell you. I've told you many times, if we're going to understand what something says, we've got to know what the words mean, don't we? Today, we're going to look at 2 words, and then we're going to run out of time, because it takes a little time. And you read it in chapter 5, verse 1 of Romans, the word justified. Did you see that one? And it says we're justified through Yeshua. So we're going to look up the word justified, and we're going to look at the word through. We won't have time to look at justified, because that's going to take a lengthy study, but we'll do that maybe next week. But this week, we're just going to look at the word through. Didn't we all know what through means? You know, it's surprising how many people read Romans, read that word through, and they don't know what it means. Well, we don't have the Hebrew word because all we have is the Greek translation. But the Greek word that's translated through is dia. Okay? Now you know what it means, don't you? It's dia. I'm going to show you how what a great artist I am. And the reason I brought this is so I can do it. Okay, this is Egypt down here. See that? That's the border of Egypt. And you remember that the Hebrews were in slavery in Egypt. They were down there about 430 years. Actually, they weren't in slavery. They were in slavery a little over 250 years, but they were in Egypt totally 430 years. When did Pharaoh release them from slavery?
Never.
Never did. Never. Never did he release them. In fact, to the last minute of his very life, he was trying to keep control of them. But you remember that the Lord told them through Moses to sacrifice the atoning lamb and put the blood on the doorposts of their little slave shack they lived in. Now, some people would say, how do you become one of the Lord's people? And some people would say, well, by believing in the Lord. Well, it's pretty good to believe in the Lord. But you know, you can believe in the Lord the rest of your life, and that will not save you. Nobody's ever saved by believing in anything. Or you could say, well, you got to invite the Lord to come in and live in your life. Well, that's good too, but that will not save you either. Supposing that, I'm sure some of you, maybe all of you have been here at one time, you got a plumbing problem at home. The flusher won't flush, the hot water won't come in hot, and you got leaks going every which way, and it's a mess, and it's been that way for a while. So you call a plumber. And after a while, you hear a knock on the door, and you say, you know, I believe I'm hearing a knock at the door. And so you go over and you open the door. Lo and behold, it's the plumber. And you say, boy, am I glad to see you. Come on in. So he comes in. He takes a look at your situation. He says, I can fix that in 2 hours, easy. Why is Mark laughing? We've said that 100 times last week on our projects. Plumber said, we'll fix that in a couple hours. And so he goes to work. And later, everything is working beautifully, it's perfect. The flusher flushes, the hot water comes in, there's no leaks, and everybody's happy. And so your neighbor comes over and says, I see everything working right. How did it get to working so good? And you say, well, because I believed I heard a knock at the door. Or, it's working because I opened the door and invited the plumber to come in. Those things had absolutely nothing to do with fixing your problem. The reason it got fixed is because the plumber came in and fixed it. That's why it got fixed. If you think it's because of what you believed or what you did, you've put your confidence in something that's absolutely unreliable. When the ancient Israelites put the blood of the lamb over the door, that did not save them. In fact, they were still in Pharaoh's slave shack when they did that. But it sent a signal out to God that said, you're the one that's going to have to save us. Pharaoh's not going to let us go. And of course, we know that. So believing by putting that blood on the door was a good thing, but that did not save them. In fact, the only thing that saved them from death that night was God himself standing guard over that house so that the death angels could not enter that house. If you're one of the Lord's people today, it isn't because you believed anything. It's not because you opened the door to anybody. It's because God did something in your life. That's why. Well, here's Egypt. Okay, so the Israelites came up here and they went across the Sinai Peninsula. Quite a long hike, but they did it in 3 days. And after 3 days, they came to the edge of the Red Sea. This is the Red Sea out here. These are waves. Okay, you got to the Red Sea, and they looked out there and they said, here's our statement of faith. God has brought us out here to destroy us. Because they looked at the Red Sea as a hopeless barrier. And then they looked off that way, and it was just burnt up desert over that way. And they looked off that way, and it was just burnt up desert. And they looked back that way, and they saw the Pharaoh's army coming after him, and he was bent on either bringing them back into slavery or killing them. And they were screaming and crying and carrying on and mourning, expressing their unbelief by saying, God brought us out here to destroy us. How much hope did they see at that point? So God said to them, stand still. Today, in our English translation, it says, I'm going to show you salvation. In Hebrew, it says, I'm going to show you Yeshua. What's Yeshua?
Salvation.
Hmm?
Salvation.
That's the English word.
Jesus.
The Greek word is, I'm going to show you Jesus. Now, the word dia, remember what dia is?
Through.
Dia means through. The translation of the Greek word dia means a channel. So, the Lord said, I'm going to show you Yeshua. And so he creates a channel across here. Was that channel wide enough for Moses to walk through?
Yes.
No, it wasn't.
And everybody else.
There was at least 600,000 people behind Moses. Some say as many as 2.5 million. How wide was the channel?
Very wide, it had to have everybody.
It wasn't wide enough for Moses, it was wide enough for the whole crowd. So the channel was probably way out or like that, something. And that's what dia means, channel. And so the people then went across here. Now, if we were there with those people and they looked out, what they would have seen ahead was a channel. But the Lord says, it's not just a wall of water over here and dry land on the bottom. That's not what you're seeing. What you're really seeing is Yeshua. You're seeing Jesus. So to one of those ancient people, what does Jesus look like? Looks like a channel through the sea, doesn't he? And so that's what they saw. They saw this channel. But here we are. We're looking at it from a little higher point of view than they were. What do we see?
The cross.
Hmm?
The cross.
Yeah, because it's through the cross the channel was made available to let the people go. So they escaped from Pharaoh through the cross. Now, again, there are those who say Jesus died as a substitute for us, or that he went to his death in our place. Did Moses cross as a substitute for Israel? Did he go in their place? How many went across? Okay, now we're at 1 Corinthians 10, verse 1.
For I do not want you to be ignorant of the fact, brothers and sisters, that our ancestors were all under the cloud, and that they all passed through the sea.
Okay, so how many of them went through the sea?
All.
How many stayed behind?
No.
If any had stayed behind, what would happen?
They wouldn't have died.
If Moses had gone across in their place, and the rest of them stayed where they were, Pharaoh would have caught him, wouldn't he? But we see also this channel did an interesting thing. It provided an escape for them from Pharaoh. And by the way, until they stepped over the border or over the edge of the shore of the sea, they were still in Egypt. Sinai is part of Egypt. They were still there. And they were still under the dominion of Pharaoh, because when they got to the Red Sea, what was their thoughts?
There's no way across.
God has betrayed us. He led us out to destroy us. They were filled with fear. What made them so scared?
They didn't believe. They didn't believe. They couldn't see with their physical eyes.
What did they see?
They saw Pharaoh's armies.
They saw
coming
Pharaoh's
after.
army, and they saw hopeless barriers in all directions. So fear was running their life, and Pharaoh was driving the fear. And Pharaoh was driving the unbelief. They were under his dominion. What they did not know is that God knew all about that, was taking care of them. So remember what we said. If we're going to understand the book of Romans, we got to believe what it says. And it says clearly, they all went through, they were justified through the work of Yeshua. And next week we're going to learn what justified means. All of us think we know. I thought I knew until I looked it up, and I found I didn't know very much about justified. But I'll tell you what I did learn, the little bit that I got, Gene, next week. One thing I wanted you to read, and that's Psalm 77, verses 19 and 20.
Your path led through the sea, your way through the mighty waters, though your footprints were not seen. You led your people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron.
Okay, the people were standing by the shore of the Red Sea, dominated by fear and unbelief that Pharaoh was inducing on them. But the psalmist said, it was your way, speaking to God, that led through the sea. So who owned the channel? God did. And he said, it was your pathway. We didn't see your footprints there. We saw Moses and Aaron leading us through, but it was really you doing it. So who led them through the Red Sea? It wasn't Moses and Aaron. They were just tools that he used. So, by the way, if any of you come over to Mark's apartments sometime pretty soon, you'll see a brand new deck and stairs that we did the other day. And somebody say, wow, that looks pretty good. You sure do have great tools. If somebody said that to me, you know how I'd feel? We worked kind of hard over there, and I was tired every night when I went home. It doesn't take much to get me tired anymore, but I was worn out. And, well, we have some pretty good tools, but some of our tools are long since worn out, but we use them anyway. If somebody says, what a nice job, you must have good tools, you know how I'd feel? I'd be insulted. Wouldn't you? If,
The tools didn't do it by themselves.
how many of you like to cook things, bake things? Anybody?
Like to eat.
What do you, what do you like to bake?
Cookies.
Cookies. Do you do chocolate chips? When are you gonna invite me to your house? Okay, so you bake a beautiful basket of chocolate chips, and you invite me, and I come over, I'll tell you this, I won't eat one of them. And I say, boy, those are good. You must have a nice oven. You gonna like that?
No.
So if you say to God, good thing you picked Moses and Aaron, they did a good job for you, that would be an insult to God. Because the psalmist said it was your path, it was your way, and you're the one who led us there. Even though we didn't see your footprints, how do you know it was God leading them across when he couldn't even see the footprints?
Who moved the water?
Hmm?
Who moved the water?
Well, that would certainly be one thing. Now, Moses and Aaron couldn't make any water go away. And what else? How did they know it was him? It's like back when we started.
Impossible.
The natural man can't understand the things of the Spirit. They're spiritually discerned. If you want to understand that it was God led him through, the Spirit of God gives you that direction. That's how you know any truth. Later on, we get a little farther into Romans, we're going to find that the way you know you belong to God is by the testimony of the Spirit of God. There's my signal. Thank you, Gene.
I'd like to say one thing.
Go ahead, Rick.
And I don't want to detract from anything, but man tries to figure things out. And one of the shows that I saw, part of was the show about how the Red Sea parted.
Mm-hmm.
And in man's wisdom, they actually set about 3, I think it was, could have been 2, but 3 airboats on the nose facing the shore. And they fired them suckers up, and they was blowing across the water. And sure enough, they got the water to actually separate and go up. And that was their conclusive proof that the scripture was correct.
Yeah, but was the soil
What about the
dry?
dry land?
Was it dry?
What about the dry land?
It dried, as long as the airboats was running, it kept the water separated, and when it crossing was dry, and the.
Would they make a wide enough swath for 600,000 people to walk across
It
through
probably
these
took a
boats?
lot of airboats.
And did they have airboats?
They turned them off.
Did they have airboats then?
I don't think they had airboats then.
I thought that was pretty amazing, the effort that somebody would go through to try to figure out logically how something like that could happen, manner, thought process.
That's like when you talk to someone that doesn't know God, and you tell them that God is working in your life. They give you this look and go, what? What'd you say? What do you mean? They have no idea what you're talking
Well, one thing we'll find when we get a little farther into this, and this, if we live long enough, this session may go on for a while, I hope you know that. But, we're gonna find that our hope is not because of things that we do or what people do, it's because of what God's done. And if we don't see that, it'll always come back down to self-effort. In other words, we save ourselves by things we do. So if anybody ever asks you, how do you get to be one of the Lord's people? Please don't answer He does things to
To
you.
you.
In other words, he makes you into something, just like the plumber that came and fixed your pipes. He didn't do anything for your pipes, he did something to them. And that's a big difference.
But you gotta have enough faith to call the plumber. You gotta have enough faith to open the door and let him in, and let him do the work.
Well,
Can't
you
do
know
it
what?
yourself.
Both of it.
The only reason to answer the door and open the door for the plumber is because the plumber's a gentleman. He's not a robber, he's not gonna kick your door down. It's just a courtesy to invite him in. But that courtesy is what you do, but it doesn't do one thing to fix your pipes. It's his work to fix them. Your work is just being courteous, that's it. God wants a friendly relationship with us. And so that saying, I'll open the door and invite him in is a way to be friendly. But it really has nothing to do with the repair work.
You have to have faith in the plumber that the plumber is going to fix your problem.
But the problem
Again-
is that faith is not what helps you.
Pipes
No,
don't
but-
respond to faith, pipes respond to a plumber that knows what he's doing.
Right.
Well, I'm thankful that my hope has little to do with anything that I know or anything I've ever done. It has everything to do with what the Lord is and what he has done. That's what it is. We'll see it further on. For the time being, rest on that.